Yeah, we're doing this again. Yeah, the reason I don't do these that often is because I can't force it. It has to just kind of come to me in a flash of inspiration. And that is exactly what happened with Fairbairn Films. Fairbairn Films.
Jackson, all the kangaroos got out.
Well, let's go get him then.
So we lost them all then?
Yeah, we lost them all.
Fairbairn Films is a sketch comedy channel created by brothers Lachlan and Jaxon. These sketches are minimalistic with a low-key feel based on exaggerating small everyday occurrences. There's also a heavy focus on their national identity as Australians, and in particular, their rural upbringing. Within the context of wider YouTube, they stand in stark contrast to the loud and over-the-top sketch comedy style of Lele Pons or Hannah Stalking. And when I say loud, I do mean visually as well. Previously, we discussed the Cancer Crew and how they were sort of pioneers of this anti-establishment new wave on YouTube. And Fairbairn Films are definitely a part of that new wave. One of their biggest inspirations was Max Mofo.
Which YouTubers do you guys look up to?
So let's really take a look at Fairbairn Films and their content. Australian identity is a huge theme in the boys' videos, from stereotypes, memes, animals, landscapes, to just Australian culture in general.
Australia review. Seeing it's only rural South Australia, which is where we are, there's not a lot going on, just sort of petty thefts and crimes. You see, because Australia is on the bottom of the earth, everything's upside down. Most Australians learn to get used to this pretty quickly, but when you wake up, it can take a couple of seconds to adjust. Then it's time to walk to the kitchen and have breakfast. For breakfast we have Vegemite toast. Anything else is illegal.
For many of us in the West, Australian culture was always defined by broad stereotypes and unrecognizably over-the-top accents.
G'day, Gandhi. It is I, Daniel Feldspar, a stereotypically Australian dragon. Koala, boomerang, wallaby, oi, oi, oi!
The reason memes like Australia doesn't exist catch on so widely isn't just because it's such an isolated and strange place, but because for many of us, we really don't know a ton about it. Meanwhile, in Australia, there's actually a widely documented phenomenon called the Australian identity crisis. A lot of Australians feel that they don't have a defined culture. So how do we get here, and how does Fairbairn Films tie into this? Well, they do, and it's complicated, and the amount of research I did for this section is insane. Australia was originally a part of the British Empire, so for a very long time the development of Australian culture was always marked by this British ownership. And this is something that's still kind of a sensitive topic for Australians. They don't like when the whole prison colony thing is brought up, but more than that, they really hate it if foreigners mistake their accents for British ones. In the 20th century, when Hollywood was absolutely booming, America had very much established themselves as the mecca of popular entertainment. In Australia, much like here in Canada, it became far cheaper to import American movies, music, and television than it was to produce locally. This resulted in massive overexposure to American culture. So both governments decided to enact laws that stated that TV stations and radio stations had to play a certain amount of Australian or Canadian, depending on the country obviously, content. This was to ensure that the culture stayed relevant and also give local artists a chance to compete against the juggernaut that was the American entertainment industry. In the same way Australians did not want to be thought of as just a British colony, Canadians were similarly struggling with the idea that they were viewed as just America too. But for a long time, there really weren't any strong Canadian cultural staples. Everything came from either America, England, France, or somewhere else. But then things changed, and it was only very recently. In the early 1980s, the Canadian stereotype we are all familiar with was born. On the Canadian sketch show SCTV, the characters Bob and Doug McKenzie were created specifically in response to these Canadian content laws. They were an amalgamation of various cultural signifiers and slang from across the country. The prairies, the East Coast, the West Coast, all mushed together into these toque-wearing, bacon-eating, beer-drinking brothers. Yeah, the whole A thing, Canadians say A, that's from Bob and Doug. They didn't come up with it, but they popularized it as a representatively Canadian term. Around this same time, Australians exported and codified their own stereotype with the Crocodile Dundee movies. The film stars Paul Hogues, a construction worker who starred in several ads for Tourism Australia.
I'll slip an extra shrimp on the barbie for you.
The film was released in 1986 and was a monster hit worldwide. Low-cost airfares and a low Australian dollar had already made the country more of a tourist destination to Americans. With the success of Crocodile Dundee, Australia became a massive fad in the US. Australian culture was Americanized and commodified for a general audience. From Foster's beer to Aussie hair care products to Billabong surfer fashion line, broad Australian imagery was a great way to sell shit. It contributed to this very baseline understanding of the continent as kangaroos, hot chicks, and those hats with corks on them. But nothing is a better example of this bizarre American trend than Outback Steakhouse, a novelty restaurant selling fake Australian cuisine in which the servers all speak in phony Aussie accents.
Now that's a steak knife.
Jaxon and Lachlan play into these stereotypes about as often as they play against them. Videos like A Day in the Life of an Australian, for example, are so over the top with every broad idea Westerners have about the country that it just shows how truly ridiculous this image is. Whereas videos like The Avengers bit on Australia and The Incredibles bit in Australia use more subtle Australian cultural cues, along with the boys' own personal sense of humor and personalities to define the but in Australia part.
Where's your suit tones?
Oh, customs took it. Turns out it's classified as a war-grade weapon.
Oh, that's pretty f***ing shit, eh?
Is that what happened to your hammer?
Oh, no, I just kind of lost that.
What?
Much like in the 1980s, Jaxon and Lachlan are actively creating a new way of defining their cultural identity and exporting it to the rest of the world. Unlike Australia Review or A Day in the Life of an Australian, these videos don't contain any of the broad stereotypes the West would immediately associate with the country. What they are defining in this series as being uniquely Australian is a speaking pattern, a way of thinking, a specific sense of humor, and a direct approach to problem solving. Whether they realize it or not, Jaxon and Lachlan are doing this incredible bait and switch where they present us with stereotypes we all know and then train their international audience to associate these other concepts with those same stereotypes. Even things like Australia has bad internet. It is, again, intentional or not, really broadening the scope of what people outside Oceania would see as Australian experiences. Similar to the ways in which America homogenized Australian culture in the 1980s and 90s, Jaxon and Lachlan take a very similar approach to the US in their video Skater Bros.
This is called the double-boarded super skip.
This one's called the crisscrosser.
This one time in Malibu, I was skating this 5-stair and it was just Skater Bros.
When we're filming with the Fairbairns, we'll do one take, and we'll be like, "No, it's gonna."
This almost
That's fucking
sarcastic, like, take. It's almost like I'm reading a script, but that's funny because it's almost a fourth wall break. Where it's like, that's the fucking whole point of it.
Lachlan and Jaxon have a very interesting style of shooting and delivery. Every line is so perfectly in succession that the scriptedness is obvious, but the one-take delivery gives it this improvisational feel.
Amateurs like you do 2 takes. I do 1 take.
This style gives it both a conversational feel, but also this sort of living room play quality. The minimalist approach of the delivery, location, and cinematography. The simple shot reverse shot of most videos make it obvious the two brothers have to take turns filming each other, which only adds to the charm.
Why the f*** do we get such shit Pokemon?
I don't know. And also, why are our Pokemon never on any TV shows or games?
Lachlan,
What?
I'm starting to think our Pokemon aren't actually Pokemon.
Are you saying we've just been collecting venomous spiders and snakes and keeping them in our shed?
Yes.
The other thing that really lend these sketches this authenticity is the costumes, or lack thereof. Using a t-shirt as a wig, or making a Mike Wazowski costume where you literally just cover one of the eyes with some paper. It's so different than what we're used to on YouTube, especially today. With sketches that are literally on par with TV, people want this kind of imagery. It seems more down to earth. At the core, it's 2 Australian farm boys goofing around, and I think people find something about that very authentic and refreshing. As opposed to, and I hate to bring her up again, but she's just such a perfect example of mainstream YouTube, Lele Pons and friends, who are so shiny and pre-packaged with this rich kids of LA vibe. They have these clean white backgrounds, everything is shot in a mansion, there's decent special effects, every costume is purchased for each specific sketch, everyone looks like an Instagram model, and half of them are. The other thing that really sets them apart is the subject matter. Much like Seinfeld, Fairbairn Films is all about little everyday things.
Lachlan, why is the sauce in the fridge?
So it's nice and cold.
It's not a fresh can of lemonade, Lachlan, it's f***ing tomato sauce.
Well, you wouldn't heat up tomato sauce. Usually you want the sauce to be cooler than the food you're putting it on.
Of course you wouldn't warm up sauce. Sauce is good at room temperature.
No, when you have hot food and cold sauce, it's perfect.
Lachlan, tomato sauce is simple. All you've got to do to it is nothing.
I completely disagree.
But they even managed to beat Seinfeld in the amount of material they can pull from such tiny elements of everyday life. There are sketches, of course, that aren't necessarily about one relatable thing. They also do parodies or character stuff like farm drama and how to attract a man, but they still use the same comedic style of everyday conversation and thought being exaggerated to the maximum potential level. In a previous video, we discussed George Miller's concept of anti-vlogging. We talked about the ways in which the Cancer Crew would often blur the line between sketch and vlog. Max Mofo, for example, mainly did this by intentionally editing in breaks in character. Filthy Frank would do this with his characters' interactions with real people. Jaxon and Lachlan do this too, but their approach is even stranger. They do this sort of weaving in and out of the fourth wall. For example, in their video, The Avengers, but in Australia.
Oh, there was a green guy.
And a guy from the old days?
Oh yeah, that lame
Yeah, well, what happened to those guys?
Oh, I think this video didn't have the budget for them.
Wait, so the $8 I got given was the budget?
Yeah.
I spent 6 of it on this hammer.
Can I have the That's a cheap hammer. Can I have the change?
No, you cannot have the change, Tony.
Why not?
You're a multi-billionaire, and you want $2 change.
They seem at first to be coming out of character, bringing up the budget of the video, but then they go right back in. So this is a video with a budget, a small budget, but he can't have the change because he's Tony Stark for real, and he's a billionaire. I mean, I realize I kind of just explained the joke here, but I really wanted you all to just kind of unwrap that and really look at it for what it is. I have literally never seen a fourth wall break done like that. It's so bizarre and I fucking love it. I think their stuff is not only hilarious, but really subversive and interesting. Fairbairn Films, I have a hard time pronouncing their name, but they're some fucking S-tier anti-establishment YouTube. Thank you so much for watching this video. It would mean so much to me if you would subscribe and leave a comment. I read literally every single comment, I'm always checking, and I will see you guys next Saturday.